Okay, so let's try to unpack this because this deep dive is, well, it's a genuinely fascinating and, I have to say, really unexpected journey.
It really is.
We're going to be using biological fact, hard science, as a kind of mirror for some pretty radical social theory.
Right. We're crossing this divide between the world of Apis mellifera,
The common honeybee.
the common honeybee, yes, a very structured, almost mechanical world, and we're putting it up against the messy, symbolic existence of, us, Homo sapiens.
And the goal is to explore some incredibly bold and, yes, definitely provocative theories about how human competence is judged.
And how wealth is actually generated, and maybe most critically, how we choose our mates.
It's a convergence I've never really seen before.
Yeah.
The sources for this are, they're all over the map, but in a good way.
They are. You've got this rigorous factual entomology on one side,
The bee science.
the hard bee science, and that gets blended with this philosophical and often really acerbic commentary on modern celebrity culture.
And then it just leads forward from there.
It does. Straight into deep speculation about the future of work, relationships, all in a society that's going to be mediated by AI.
So our mission here is really to synthesize all of this. We're using I guess you'd call it the brutally mechanical social structure of the honeybee hive.
A system that's all about collective purpose and extreme individual sacrifice.
And using that as a launch pad.
Right. A launch pad to contrast that raw evolutionary instinct with our own human social strategies, especially when we talk about that one essential quality, competence.
When you look at the material we have, it's just a strange alchemy. We're talking about the fatal high-altitude mating flights of drone bees in one breath.
And in the next, we're on the cultural impact of someone like Kurt Cobain.
Right, or the architecture of crypto, of decentralized finance, and then jumping back to, ancient political fears that made authorities shut down medieval taverns.
But it all ties together. The sources really do provide this cohesive, interlocking set of arguments.
And it all seems to circle back to what happens when those natural, sometimes painful, filters for reproductive success just break down.
That requirement to prove your value, when that gets bypassed by inherited wealth or just, unearned status.
And the whole foundation for this entire analysis, it's right there in the hive. It's this fundamental tension.
It is. You have the relentless, self-sacrificing labor of the sterile female workers. They're the backbone of the entire civilization.
And on the other hand,
you have the utterly singular, fleeting, and ultimately fatal moment of purpose that's granted to the male drones.
So the worker's competence is for survival.
Day-to-day survival. The drone's competence is for perpetuation.
Let's start with a piece of entomology that I found pretty surprising. It really grounds all the social metaphors that are going to follow.
Okay, I have to ask the question that sounds like it should be a joke, but it's rooted in very serious science.
Go for it.
Can honey actually ferment inside the hive? Can bees literally get drunk? Yes. The sources confirm this isn't science fiction at all. It's a constant, ever-present threat to the colony.
So it's a real hazard.
It's a constant hazard that the hive has to meticulously, constantly guard against. Fermentation is just a natural process. It happens whenever the water content of the nectar they've stored gets too high.
Then what's the threshold?
Specifically, anything above about 18% water. In that kind of moist, sugary environment, natural yeast and other microorganisms just thrive.
Just like making beer or wine.
Exactly like that. They consume the sugars, and their metabolic byproduct is ethanol, alcohol, and carbon dioxide.
So the worker bees, they're not just collectors. They're acting as these incredibly sophisticated, tiny little food processing engineers.
That's their primary job, preventing that fermentation.
It's their first and most vital job.
Precisely. They're in a nonstop collective battle against intoxication and, the degradation of their food supply.
So how do they do it?
Well, when a forager bee comes back, the nectar she has is still very watery. So it goes through this process of repeated regurgitation and evaporation.
They pass it from bee to bee.
Yeah, to mouth, yeah.
Oh.
And they fan the nectar with their wings to gradually drive that water content down until it hits that critical 18% threshold or even lower.
That sounds incredibly labor-intensive.
It is. It requires huge levels of coordination and just constant physical effort.
So they're basically running an organic dehydration factory in the dark.
That is a perfect way to put it, yeah.
Right.
And beyond just the physical evaporation, they're also adding things to it.
Like what?
They introduce specialized enzymes. The main one is glucose oxidase.
Okay.
And this enzyme kicks off a chemical reaction that converts some of the glucose into gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide.
So they're changing the chemistry.
They are. The gluconic acid lowers the pH, makes it more acidic, and the hydrogen peroxide acts as an antibacterial agent. All of this helps to inhibit any yeast growth.
And only after all of that work is done is the honey ready for storage.
Right. Once it's ripened, stabilized, and dried out, they cap the individual cells with beeswax.
Sealing it off.
Exactly. That wax cap seals the golden product away. It blocks any external moisture and oxygen, and it basically guarantees its long-term preservation. It's safe from all those microbes.
It's an amazing collective effort. And it really is the definition of competence, right? It's essential for the whole colony to survive the lean seasons.
It is. But the sources do note that when conditions are wrong, say it's too humid, or maybe a small group of workers fails at their job.
Fermentation happens.
It does. And the consequences for an individual bee are immediate and pretty serious.
What happens to a drunk bee?
Well, eating fermented honey can cause immediate disorientation, loss of motor control.
Wow.
Yeah, paralysis, or even death, depending on the concentration of the alcohol.
And the sources mention this other behavior. Hooliganism.
Right. Hooliganism. It sounds almost intentional, doesn't it?
It does, like they're just causing trouble.
Yeah. And in a way, they are. It's the behavioral breakdown of the hive's social contract, and it's driven by a chemical alteration. Their normal social inhibitions just disappear.
Because their judgment is impaired.
Their navigation and judgment are shot. So instead of doing their duties, these intoxicated bees often turn to this aggressive robbing behavior. They'll try to steal nectar from rival hives.
Because they can't forage honestly anymore?
Exactly. They become this destabilizing force within the whole community structure.
Which leads us to debunking a pretty interesting idea that the sources themselves bring up.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that a queen might deliberately want this chaos. That she might ferment honey on purpose to manipulate the drones.
Yeah, the scientific sources shoot that down pretty firmly. And they have to.
Why?
Because the entire integrity and survival of the hive is based on order, on harmony, and on the unwavering dedication of the workers. The idea that a queen would, stoop to these deceitful practices.
Creating a toxic environment on purpose.
Right, to manipulate the males. The source calls it a ludicrous fabrication. The workers' function relies on their loyalty, their devotion. Introducing chemical chaos would just fundamentally undermine the competence the hive needs to survive.
So it sets the stage perfectly. The hive is the ultimate symbol of competence and order.
And intoxication is the ultimate threat to that order.
Okay, so let's move from the mechanics of honey to the core social structure of the hive. Because this is really the engine for all the human comparisons that come later.
Absolutely.
We've got the worker bees, the drones, and the queen. Now, we often hear the workers described metaphorically as like chaste maidens, but that language kind of obscures the biological reality, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. They're not defined by celibacy. They're defined by their sterility. They are fundamentally female. They're the queen's sisters, but their reproductive systems have been evolutionarily repurposed.
Repurposed by what?
By diet and by hormonal signaling. For instance, their ovaries are reduced, and in many cases, they're specifically adapted to produce royal jelly.
The stuff that makes new queens.
The divine elixir, exactly. It's the rich secretion that feeds the young larvae and creates the future queens.
So they are the economic engine of the entire hive.
They are everything. They do virtually all the labor. They forage tirelessly for nectar and pollen. They manage all the brood care. They handle sanitation. They defend the hive fiercely.
And as the source notes, they have the thankless task of managing the waste of the males.
Yes. Their entire existence is one of selflessness, devotion to the queen, and a deep commitment to the sisterhood. They are the generative competence of the hive, full stop.
Now let's contrast that with their male counterparts, the drones, who are defined by their singular, almost existential laziness.
The playboys, as the source calls them. And yeah, their existence is so singular, it's almost a biological anomaly in terms of labor.
Their sole purpose is to mate.
That's it. They are physically large, they're robust, they're loud,
Yep.
but they just consume resources. They eat honey, nectar, bee bread.
What's bee bread?
It's a fermented mix of pollen and honey. It's a vital nutrient source. But the point is, they consume it, they don't forage for it, they don't fight, they don't do any hive maintenance or defense.
So they are completely 100% reliant on the female workers for their own survival.
They literally just lounge around the hive waiting for their one moment of glory.
Their entire economic contribution is negative.
Completely negative. They consume resources that were created by the labor of others. And this is where that metaphorical worker resentment starts to fester, even in the allegorical accounts we see.
You can feel the frustration.
Oh, yeah. The worker bee collects this hard-earned nectar, processes it so diligently, and then is forced to regurgitate it or sell it to these lazy, profiteering drones.
Who are just acting as middlemen for their own genetic imperative.
And squandering the fruits of the workers' labor in the process.
But the workers do it anyway.
They do, because the drive for the collective is stronger than any individual resentment. They're bound by this unbreakable genetic loyalty and an unwavering pride in their duty.
Their sacrifice ensures the hive survives.
And that the queen's lineage continues. But still, when you analyze the hive as a social model, that frustration is palpable. The drones show no appreciation for the physical difficulty of the work. They contribute nothing.
And this tension, it all culminates in the most dramatic and, frankly, brutal biological event in the hive, the mating rite.
The drone's one shot at meaning.
And it is astonishing in its brevity and its finality.
It is. So you have the drones, and there can be thousands of them across different colonies. They all gather in these vast, specific aerial locations.
The drone congregation areas, DCAs.
The DCAs, right. And these areas can be way up high, many meters in the air, and they often stay consistent year after year. It's almost like a specific nightclub or historical meeting place just for the males.
And the virgin queens fly through these areas.
A handful of times on their mating flights. A virgin queen will fly directly through these DCAs, and the strategy is polyandrous.
Meaning she mates with multiple drones.
Multiple, sometimes a dozen or more, all in a single flight.
And the reason for that is purely about the genetic health of the colony.
It's the ultimate biological insurance policy. Mating with all those different drones ensures the maximum genetic diversity. That's what you need for a robust, adaptable colony that can resist disease and survive all kinds of environmental stress.
But the moment of success for any individual drone is, quite literally, the moment of his immediate fatal demise.
Absolutely. The physical act of mating is a single, traumatic, and fatal event.
How does it happen?
In that split second of coupling, the drone averts his endophilus, his reproductive organ, with such incredible force that he gets maximum sperm delivery.
And the crucial part.
The crucial part is that the organ breaks off inside the queen. It forms a mating plug.
Which ensures his genetic material stays put.
Right. It prevents sperm leakage. But that traumatic detachment ruptures the drone's abdominal tissues, his reproductive organs. It leads to catastrophic internal trauma.
And he just falls away.
Instantly, paralyzed, and dies within moments.
So this idea that a drone might try to, retain his endophilus to mate again.
Biologically impossible, completely. The physical stress and tissue trauma of that evolution, whether the plug is fully formed or not, it's fatal. His entire evolutionary function is completed in one explosive, final, total act of self-sacrifice.
His life is consumed by one single act of generative competence.
And that fatality, death upon completion of purpose, it's shocking to us, especially when you frame it through, human sentiment.
It seems so brutal.
But the sources give us some really important context here. They show that the invertebrate world is just full of these brutal, transactional, and often intensely self-sacrificial mating systems.
So it helps frame the honeybee's fate, not as some weird exception.
But maybe as a particularly high-stakes version of a very common biological rule. It's vital context. Nature is not polite.
Right.
It's a relentless machine. It's focused purely on the propagation of genes, and often at an extreme cost to the individual male. This brutality just shows how much selection pressure there is to maximize that one moment of genetic transfer.
So let's run through some of the examples the sources highlight. The classic one, of course, is the praying mantis.
Right. The female praying mantis often practices what's called sexual cannibalism. She may, and frequently does, decapitate the male during copulation.
What's fascinating and kind of morbidly efficient is what the sources point out about that.
It's that sometimes the decapitation actually increases the efficiency of the copulation.
Oh.
You lose the nervous inhibition from the brain, so the male's body just continues the reproductive act with even greater vigor. It ensures the gene transfer happens before he becomes a male.
So the best sex of his life is his very last one.
Proving that the body's function can exceed the brain's necessity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you have the bedbugs. which just sound like a pure biological horror show.
They really are. They use a strategy called traumatic insemination.
It sounds awful.
It is. The male completely bypasses the female's legitimate reproductive tract. Instead, he uses his sharp, needle-like genitals to violently stab her through the abdomen, through her body wall, and he injects sperm directly into her body cavity, into her hemolymph. It's a forceful, aggressive, and highly injurious strategy.
It's a complete evolutionary arms race.
That's what it is. Female defense mechanisms are constantly being subverted by this brutal male aggression that's focused solely on transmission.
And maybe the weirdest of all, the deep-sea anglerfish. This
Yeah.
one feels truly alien.
It's the ultimate evolutionary convergence of male purpose into pure utility.
The male is tiny, right?
He's tiny, almost vestigial compared to the colossal female who lives down there in the dark. When a male finds a female, he bites onto her body.
And then what?
His jaw fuses permanently to her skin, his circulatory system connects to hers, and he just degenerates. He loses his eyes, his other non-essential organs.
And he becomes what?
He becomes, effectively, a permanent parasitic sperm bank, just serving her reproductive needs for the rest of his life.
Wow. It's just hard to process that level of biological imperative where the individual male is so utterly secondary to the need for genetic transfer.
It really makes you realize how much human society works to deliberately subvert, or at least massively complicate, that pure evolutionary pressure.
Right.
These examples, the mantis, the bedbug, the anglerfish, and our fatal drone, they show that the honeybee's sacrificial fate is just one highly efficient version of a common evolutionary pressure,
Maximize gene spread.
even if it requires the extreme, immediate termination of the individual male. So if we accept that premise that nature often demands singular competence followed by disposal, then the human system, well, that becomes the real anomaly we need to examine.
That is the perfect pivot point. Because if insect evolution often demands this fatal singular competence, what is the evolutionary mechanism that demands competence in human males? And is it just as brutal, even if it's, socially constructed? So here's where we pivot from that mechanical self-will competence of the bee world to highlight the unique, messy, and highly socially constructed competence filters in our world.
And we have to start with the fundamental hormonal divergence.
Okay, so first, a necessary biological reminder. The honeybee caste system, as we just talked about, is not driven by testosterone.
Right. Invertebrates use totally different signaling systems.
Yeah.
Their development, their differentiation, it's all governed by ecdysteroids and peptide hormones, and most importantly, by what they eat as larvae.
The royal jelly.
Royal jelly is the key differentiator that triggers a queen to develop, versus the diet of bee bread and honey for the workers in drones. The whole system is mechanical. It's based on nutrition and pheromonal cues.
But in the mammalian world, and especially in primates and humans, testosterone is the crucial biological currency.
It is. And the sources show this direct correlation between high male over female testosterone ratios and the intensity of male competition for mates and resources. The ratios basically reflect the evolutionary stakes.
They're a physiological marker of how intense the competition is.
Exactly. I mean, look at large ungulates, where rutting and physical combat are the main ways to secure mating access. The ratios are enormous.
As in deer.
In deer, yeah, males can have testosterone levels 10 to 20 times higher than females during the breeding season.
Wow.
In cattle, it's more like 5 to 10 times higher. Even in horses, it's 3 to 5 times. These ratios are what fuel that seasonal aggression you need to successfully win the mating lottery.
And the extreme examples really drive this point home, especially with territoriality and aggression.
Think about the bull shark. They're notorious for extreme aggression and strict territoriality. They have some of the highest recorded testosterone levels of any animal.
And that hormonal surge is the engine.
It is the physiological engine fueling their need for dominance, for territorial control, and for just relentless competition. It's competence defined purely by physical mastery and aggression.
Okay, now let's connect this back to us. Human males have a greater male over female testosterone ratio than our closest relatives, the chimpanzees.
They do.
Chimps are competitive, but the human ratio is comparatively higher. So what social pressure drove that specific increased hormonal difference in humans?
Well, the sources attribute this specific human difference to 2 interlocking pressures:
Okay.
intense female selectivity and the necessity of long-term provisioning and parental investment.
So it's not just about winning a fight.
Exactly. Unlike most other primates, ancestral human females started selecting for males who could not just physically dominate their rivals, but who could also secure resources, build shelter, maintain social status, and protect the family unit over the long haul.
That is a much higher bar for competence than just simple physical dominance.
It is. The male was selected not just for brute force, but for the ability to produce and protect.
And that drove selection pressures for males to become even more dominant, more territorial.
And more intensely competitive in the abstract, resource-acquiring sense.
Yeah.
And those are all traits that are fundamentally supported and amplified by high, sustained testosterone levels.
So if the drone's competence is fatal and singular,
the human male's competence is a lifetime burden of competitive production, all required to meet that high bar set by female selectivity and the long-term needs of the offspring.
and this brings us to the core divergence that the sources really stress separates us from the animal kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
This unique human trait of paternal protection when it comes to reproduction. The source argues that human fathers use these testosterone-charged actions, the hard, defensive labor, striving for status.
Not just to secure mates for themselves.
Right, but critically, to protect their daughters from what's perceived as suboptimal procreation.
This specific paternal impulse, aimed at controlling the timing and the context of a daughter's mating, is exceptionally rare. It's almost non-existent in the wider animal kingdom.
Look at the examples we just used, chimpanzees and bonobos.
In their societies, the father has little to no role in protecting daughters from mating or, gatekeeping their choices.
And why would that paternal gatekeeping be counterproductive for them evolutionarily?
Because for most species, the primary evolutionary priority is just maximizing gene distribution. Get the genes out there as quickly and as widely as possible.
So a chimp father's success is measured by how many offspring he sires.
Not by the long-term status of those offspring's future mates, no. If a female can reproduce, she should reproduce. Any instinct to delay or control that process would just hinder maximum gene distribution.
But bonobo society is an interesting contrast because it's matriarchal.
It's a powerful contrast. Bonobo society is built on high female cooperation, and mothers are often seen actively supporting their sons' rank and their mating opportunities.
So there's less pressure for that intense physical male aggression.
Right, and sexual activity is used a lot for tension reduction and social bonding, not just purely for reproductive competition. But even in this more peaceful context, the father doesn't generally exert that kind of long-term, protective, status-driven control over his daughter's mating choices that is standard in human culture.
So in humans, the protective behavior is about something far more complex than just gene distribution. It's about social currency.
Exactly. The human father's protective behavior is fundamentally about controlling the context of reproduction. It's to ensure the success, the status, and the material provisioning of the resulting grandchildren.
It's a complex social strategy.
It is. Protecting the family lineage and its accumulated assets, that trumps the immediate animal imperative of just spreading genes. He's protecting the multi-generational investment.
So if we accept that framework, the societal implication of this paternal requirement for competence is massive.
It is the central analytical premise of the source material. It suggests that human achievement and our stable societal structures are deeply, perhaps dangerously, linked to this specific selective pressure.
The argument being?
The argument is that any mating strategy or any legal or social framework that allows a potential partner to bypass that long, hard, expensive process of proving competence.
That ability to metaphorically slay the dragon.
Right. If you let someone bypass that, it could be devastating to humanity.
Because it removes the foundational selective pressure that drives male achievement, responsibility, and productive societal contribution.
And if that pressure is removed, if you can get status without the corresponding competence, then the sources argue the societal foundations just begin to rot.
The competence filter is dismantled.
And it allows for the widespread success of individuals who can consume and extract value without generating it. The system becomes populated by drones who successfully access the queen's lineage without paying that fatal, or at least the lifetime, cost of competence.
Which is where the model of aristocracy comes in as a historical warning.
And here we see the mechanical failure point, the decay of competence.
And this goes deeper than, the common corporate failure, the Peters principle, where people get promoted beyond their ability.
Much deeper. This is the structural genetic decoupling of competence from reproductive fitness. It's the historical model of aristocratic rot, played out over generations.
So let's define the 3 generations the sources use. We start with generation 1. The producer.
The producer, or
Yeah.
the farmer, the founder.
Mm.
This individual is characterized by what's called generative competence.
Meaning they create wealth.
They create wealth, land, enterprises. Through demonstrable skill, hard labor, physical toughness, innovation, their competence is tangible.
They physically built the walls, grew the crops, invented the process.
Exactly. Their success is indisputable proof of their skill. They earn their status through work.
Then comes generation 2, the manager.
This individual, the manager or the lord, inherits the tangible assets and the social status, and their competence shifts dramatically.
It's no longer about generating wealth from scratch.
No, now it's about managing the existing assets, organizing the underlings that the producer trained, extracting rent or tribute, and maintaining the estate through bureaucratic or diplomatic skill.
So it's an abstract competence, not a generative one.
Right. And crucially, they use this inherited wealth and status to marry for maximum social and aesthetic return. They marry for visible beauty, often seeking that highly conspicuous signal of fertility and youth.
And finally, generation 3, the heir. This is the point of maximum fragility.
The heir inherits both the accumulated wealth and the aesthetic signals, the beauty of the mother. But because the infrastructure is already built and the bureaucracy is in place,
They lack the original generative competence that created the wealth in the first place.
they rely entirely on underlings, on institutional coercion, on inherited systems to maintain their status. Wealth and symbolic beauty are inherited, but the core skill, the ability to create value, is gone.
And that structural failure is what the sources are calling the decay of competence. The role of beauty in this analysis is particularly cold-blooded.
It's absolutely direct. In this evolutionary framework, beauty is preyed upon by competence.
So it's a target.
It's a vital biological signal: youth, fertility, accessibility. It is a target. It is not in itself a weapon or a generative skill. The problem arises because wealth and status act as this powerful buffer. They shield incompetence.
So wealth allows beauty to succeed reproductively, even if the individual attached to that wealth is an incompetent heir.
Precisely. Wealth buffers the inability to slay the dragon. It lets beauty amplify mating success regardless of the generative skill of the mate.
And this continually produces a genetic and cultural drift away from the core competence that initially built the dynasty.
The offspring are beautiful and wealthy, but they're structurally weak. Historically, this is the mechanism by which established aristocracies decline and eventually collapse. It demonstrates the fragility of any system where competence is decoupled from reproductive fitness.
So this framework competence decay, wealth buffering incompetence, the drive for status without substance, this isn't just some historical anecdote or a biological curiosity.
Not at all.
The sources apply it directly to modern life. They use the hive as a metaphor to understand our current cultural, social, and economic anxieties.
And the drone analogy gets applied most provocatively to certain types of cultural figures.
Why so?
Rock stars, actors, other celebrities, especially those who become fabulously wealthy by channeling these universal themes of alienation, misery, or anger. They're categorized as slackers or clowns,
The argument being that they use entertainment.
which is consumed overwhelmingly by a female audience as a highly lucrative substitute for performing manual generative labor,
There's a powerful irony there. They monetize the angst of feeling worthless or alienated.
only to become so wealthy that they are completely removed from the very struggle that made their art feel authentic in the first place.
The irony is structural.
It is. Their status is built on social competence, on performance, on emotional resonance, not productive competence. They didn't build a bridge or cure a disease.
The source mentions Kurt Cobain.
It does, noting that this kind of instant, massive wealth often comes without the financial or managerial acumen you need to handle complex assets. And that leads to disillusionment, substance abuse, personal fragility,
They become very successful drones.
consuming the fruits of the system without understanding its generative mechanics. Yes.
Now, this celebrity drone analogy, it ties into one of the most compelling and detailed claims in the sources.
The Great Pacification Pipeline.
A historical analysis of the political danger of male-only spaces.
This is where the social history really meets the biological metaphor. Historically, these male-only gathering spots, taverns, coffee houses, guild halls, Masonic lodges, they were essentially drone congregation areas.
places where men bonded through shared hardship, exchanged ideas, articulated collective resentments.
And critically, these spaces often doubled as revolutionary incubators. Ideas fermented there, right alongside the alcohol.
They were dangerous to establish authority because they allowed for this shared identification, a collective, politically charged, we're all in this together camaraderie.
Exactly. And the crucial element, as the source argues, was the absence of the queen, the female selectivity filter.
Because there were no queens present to redirect attention.
The discussion stayed intensely focused on abstract political ideas, on structural injustice, on collective organizing. It didn't dissolve into the constant energy-draining and distracting performance of courtship or mating games.
And the source specifically links the destruction of these spaces to policy changes, particularly prohibition in the U.S. in the 1920s.
Right. When the lawful male-only taverns disappeared, they were replaced by speakeasies.
Which were illegal, riskier.
And critically, they were designed as mixed-sex spaces to maximize profitability and minimize the risk of being detected. Women, the queens, became staples of these venues. They were often hired or encouraged as social bait to broaden the clientele and increase consumption.
And the political energy was redirected.
This is the Great Pacification Pipeline. The revolutionary energy that once fueled political organizing and male solidarity was successfully diverted and redirected into courtship energy.
That argument is chilling.
It is. Rather than risking the politically active drones congregating in pubs where a genuine revolution could brew, the societal system learned to herd the privileged ones into these gilded DCAs like modern universities or social venues.
And fill them with intoxicants, music.
And the constant psychological distraction of the mating marketplace.
The ultimate outcome being the successful destruction of male political solidarity and replacing political organizing with the far less threatening energy of competitive courtship.
The non-privileged were sent off to war or manual labor, while the potential intellectuals were neutralized by pleasure. The social engineers realized that a competitive, sexually charged environment is the ultimate suppressant of collective political action.
Because individual attention is relentlessly focused on short-term biological competition.
Instead of long-term, abstract social restructuring.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving to the contemporary world. Automation and AI threaten to remove the necessity of a vast segment of human labor.
Right.
The sources argue this creates the ultimate risk of recreating that competence decay distortion we saw in the aristocracy model, but on a societal scale.
Wealth and status become even more detached from generative labor. This separation between competence and reward becomes a structural vulnerability.
And the source uses a brilliant contemporary anecdote to illustrate this class conflict.
The public fight over social media verification. The infamous blue checkmark. It seems like such a trivial thing, but the sociological implications are huge. What's fascinating is that the blue checkmark originally functioned as this elite credential, way beyond just verifying your identity.
It was a marker of symbolic power. It signaled ideological compliance and earned status within a specific cultural aristocracy.
The validation elites.
The validation elites, the journalists, academics, high-status activists, traditional celebrities. The checkmark implied you are important because people look at you, and because you are approved by the right institutions or validated by the media ecosystem.
But then ownership of the platform changed. The checkmark became purchasable. Anyone with the money could buy it.
And this triggered intense rage from the original holders.
Why was that so volatile?
Because the rage was fundamentally a desperate defense of class boundaries. The shift commoditized status. It allowed individuals who generated wealth through infrastructural means.
The people who build supply chains or software backends or industrial systems?
Right. It allowed them to access a status symbol that was previously reserved exclusively for the cultural aristocracy. These infrastructural rich, who often hold very different ideological viewpoints, could suddenly purchase entry into the validation class.
And the original validation elites were furious that their earned status, the status granted by compliance and cultural cachet, could be accessed by people they often held in contempt.
The physical and technical producers?
So the source argues the indignation wasn't really about safety or impersonation.
No, it was about the erosion of a sacred, non-fungible credential. The fight was about who gets to be legible as important in a world where real generative labor is increasingly automated away.
And removing that filter exposed the underlying contempt.
The contempt that the validation elites hold for anyone whose wealth creation doesn't rely on abstract intellectual or political compliance. The distortion is profound. When wealth and status decouple from labor, mating boundaries harden around these symbolic markers, and the structural instability just grows and grows. So if AI and automation complete this structural detachment of wealth from necessary human labor, where do the sources propose a solution? It seems to lie in technology itself.
Specifically in decentralized financial systems.
Cryptocurrency.
Yes. Cryptocurrency, specifically systems based on proof of work, is presented not just as a financial tool, but as a philosophical attempt to enforce meritocratic competence virtually.
So it's an effort to return to a proof of work currency.
To replace the debt-based fiat system that the source links conceptually to, abstract, intellectual, and sedentary work.
And what's the link to competence? Why is proof of work seen as inherently meritocratic?
Well, fiat currency is, by its nature, managed and created by centralized institutions, government, central banks, and its value relies on trust and abstract policy decisions.
Right.
Paudio, however, requires the expenditure of real-world resources. Energy, computation, time, you have to spend those to generate the coin.
Just like metal-based currencies required the physical, testosterone-charged labor of mining and refining. Exactly. Hauptil requires computational labor, and the source argues that this computational labor is a direct, auditable proof of effort. That makes the resulting currency inherently more resistant to arbitrary inflation and linked to demonstrable contribution. It enforces competence in the digital realm.
But what about these significant energy concerns that are often associated with proof-of-work systems?
The belief is that the market forces will naturally and elegantly correct this through transparency and selection.
How so?
Well, if systems start to preference cleaner coins, let's say a hypothetical sun coin mined via solar power over an unethically sourced coal coin, then miners will be driven to seek the maximum value from the minimum environmental impact.
Because the blockchain could track and verify the source of the energy input.
And make Suncoin a premium, more valuable, more ethical asset. The system self-regulates toward efficiency and accountability.
This philosophical push for meritocratic accountability leads directly into the source's most radical proposal for the future of relationships.
The fictional AI-driven fire-breathing dragon, or FBD matchmaking service.
And FBD is designed specifically to reintroduce that competence filter into mate selection.
The filter that society lost when wealth and status decoupled from generative skill, it proposes replacing those traditional social and wealth filters with a meritocracy enforced by code and psychological vetting.
Let's dive into the mechanics of this, because this is a crucial conceptual point. How does FBD function in practice?
So men are categorized as knights. They earn sexual access not by inherited wealth or aesthetic appeal, but by proving genuine competence.
This involves the literal or metaphorical slaying of dragons.
Completing difficult, resource-intensive tasks that generate real-world or verifiable digital value. And the system isn't just grading completion. The AI is constantly vetting the knights on the difficulty of the tasks they overcome, but also on deeper measures.
Like what?
Character, perseverance, resourcefulness, psychological growth, long-term stability.
So the system is acting as an objective, unbribable father figure, the ultimate paternal protector.
It replaces the flawed, decaying social filter with an objective, competence-based filter enforced by code. It takes the ultimate achievement of the human male, the ability to generate security and provision, and makes it a quantifiable metric for social success.
Okay, but what about the women, the princesses in this fictional system? They also have to commit to the structure for it to work.
Absolutely. The system relies on commitment and accountability from both sides. Before entering, princesses agree that they will consider the dragon slayer as a worthy mate once he completes the vetting and the task requirements.
And to ensure that commitment.
And to prevent the social malaise of, fear of missing out from wrecking the whole structure, there are defined penalties for opt-outs that aren't based on verifiable issues.
What kind of penalties ensure compliance?
Well, the structure ensures that while the princesses maintain a necessary opt-out clause, for instance, if the knight is psychologically unfit or poses a genuine threat, they are encouraged to honor their agreements.
The commitment element is key.
It is. It reinforces the principle that relationships are earned through demonstrated character, competence, and perseverance. It prevents the system from becoming a purely transactional marketplace where the successful knight can be immediately rejected based on a whim.
Which would sabotage the whole incentive structure for competence.
Exactly.
This extreme social engineering, it would necessitate a completely new economic model. The dual currency system. We need to clearly define how this works conceptually.
The fictional FBD economy uses two primary integrated currencies, and they're linked in this complex, self-regulating union transaction. The goal is balance.
Okay, first, the male-driven smart currency.
This currency is based entirely on competence, production, and proof of work. It reflects the testosterone side of the economy, the necessary drive for scarcity, achievement, infrastructure creation, and growth. You can only earn it by creating verifiable, useful assets or services. It's the currency of value generation.
And the second one, the female-driven smart currency, is debt-driven and consumption-oriented. This concept needs careful explanation.
Right. In this context, debt-driven doesn't mean traditional financial debt in the negative sense. It refers to a social contract currency that's focused on needs, sustainability, and equitable distribution.
It reflects the estrogen side.
The focus on maintaining the internal ecosystem and ensuring that guaranteed basic needs, food, shelter, care, are met responsibly. It's the currency of consumption and social safety.
So every transaction becomes a self-regulating balance of growth and sustainability. Can we walk through a sample transaction to see how they influence each other?
Certainly. So imagine a knight, through his proof of work, his male currency, validates the creation of a new sustainable water utility system. This injection of male currency drives asset creation and growth.
Okay.
Now, a princess uses her needs-based currency, her female currency, to purchase water or food consumption that's guaranteed by that utility. The system then automatically adjusts the exchange rate or the creation rate of both currencies based on this union transaction.
So if the male currency is produced too quickly, let's say excessive growth without need,
the female currency's value, the guaranteed access to basic goods, could deflate. It signals an unstable bubble.
and conversely.
If the female currency is spent too quickly on consumption without corresponding male currency being generated to create assets, the system signals scarcity and inflation, and that forces the knights to increase their productive effort.
It ensures a self-regulating balance.
It's designed to align resources with generative competence and verifiable need. It effectively repairs those ancient breaks caused by wealth decoupling from skill, and it prevents the aristocratic decay we talked about earlier.
It's a closed-loop system designed for maximum long-term stability.
Wow.
This has been a truly comprehensive analysis. I mean, we started with the bitter taste of honey in a chaotic beehive and tracked the necessary competence required to keep order.
We did. We explored the unique evolutionary burden of the human protective father.
Analyzed the political weaponization of male-only spaces through the lens of that pacification pipeline.
And finally, looked at these radical, speculative solutions like the FBD system and proof-of-work currency as possible answers to competence decay.
The fundamental takeaway, it seems, is that the tension between our biological imperatives and our societal systems is just permanent.
We're always struggling to balance pure instinct with necessary social construction. And the ultimate challenge for any stable society, whether it's a physical hive, a feudal aristocracy, or a digital civilization, is ensuring that the filters for reproductive success and social status consistently reward genuine, generative competence.
Because if those filters fail, if inherited wealth, inherited beauty, or purchased aesthetic signals are allowed to bypass the necessity of production,
then the society begins to rot from the top down. And that decay, according to these sources, requires either a systemic collapse to reset the playing field,
or perhaps a radical structural intervention enforced by technology like the FDD system proposes.
That's the aha moment. It's not just about fairness, it's about survival. You, the listener, now have a framework to analyze not just economic systems, but the hidden evolutionary pressures that are driving social friction today.
So what's the final provocative thought we leave you with today, building on the security architecture required for these proposed future systems?
We covered the moral principle that's inherent in the design of any security system, particularly in the context of digital sovereignty. Whether it's managing a crypto key or accessing a matchmaking service,
Right.
any system that is designed to permit a third-party override of user security, a backdoor for a service provider, an encryption flaw for a government, is based on a profound and unproven assumption.
That being?
That centralized authority will remain benevolent, competent, and uncorruptible across infinite time.
And history, however, provides no evidence that this assumption is ever justified.
None. Power corrupts, and systems designed to facilitate benevolent control inevitably facilitate malevolent control when the hands change.
So this flips the ethical question completely on its head.
It does. If cryptography and system design exist precisely because trust fails at scale, then the moral imperative for architects and designers shifts.
So the question becomes,
Is the highest ethical priority always to design systems that make lawful override technically impossible, even if that creates temporary inconvenience or difficulty for law enforcement or security agencies?
the question is whether we prioritize safety by making abuse impossible.
Or whether we tolerate vulnerability in exchange for convenience. That conflict sits right at the heart of digital sovereignty and the architecture of our future society. Something to mull over as you watch the next celebrity drone fly by.